This week on Painting Lines,
11 of his 12 titles are on clay. He's showing that even just being like exceptional on one surface can bring you to like a top 10 level of player.
Doesn't Andy Murray deserve, what was it, 4 or 5 Australian Open titles? Because he's been
Yeah.
in the final 4 or 5 times.
Even if Nadal is weakened, he's still the go to clay.
welcome to the Painting Lines podcast, your one-stop shop for all things tennis. Join Erik and Aidan in their discussion for updates on news and pop culture, and from hot takes to betting, they've got you covered.
Ready?
Welcome back to Painting Lines. Last week we gave a recap of the Italian Open, and this week with the clay court slam at Roland Garros starting today, we wanted to give just a simple breakdown of what the clay surface is like and talk about how it changes the game, especially at the highest level, and break down kind of what makes it unique compared to the other surfaces. So I just wanted to give like a quick history lesson to start us off. Essentially, all courts used to be grass, but in 1880, the Renshaw brothers in Cannes, France, essentially put dirt on their grass court to keep it from like wilting in the heat. And since then, they kind of developed on that concept. But essentially, that's what it is. It's just a dirt court. And so that's what makes it special and how that's how it impacts how the play goes. But Erik, just starting us off here, do you want to give like a quick breakdown of how clay kind of plays differently than the other surfaces like hard court and grass?
Yeah, definitely. That was pretty interesting. Thanks for that little history lesson. I know in Australia they were using anthill dirt too, so it's kind of funny how it's evolved. But I would say there's three main components to how clay plays differently. First, you have the spin. So the clay actually accentuates spin. So drop shots are going to bounce lower and topspin is going to bounce higher. The reason being the ball sticks to the ground longer instead of just sliding off, picks up that extra dirt. And then the pace. So even though there's going to be more spin, the ball actually comes in a lot slower because the added friction of the clay. It's what I said before. So on grass and hard court, the ball is just going to be like kind of skipping off the surface, so it's going to come off a lot faster. But when you have the clay, it really dulls it down. That's why you see a lot of those high balls, heavy balls. And then the last thing I want to touch on is the sliding. If you're not used to playing on clay, it could feel like you're ice skating out there. It's kind of tough to get your bearings. You really have to have good core stability and basically good movement out there, good control of your body. And I feel like it makes the game a little different because you're able to slide on the baseline too. Like if you need to get a tough ball in the corner, the clay will slow it down, first of all, and your ability to slide. I think, it makes points last a lot longer. You have to be a little more strategic instead of, just hitting pure power. And then obviously being able to get the drop shots at the net, you can get in there and have a nice slide.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think to an extent, people have brought sliding over a little bit onto hard court. Like you see guys that are able to effectively slide on hard court, but you see them then go on to clay and it's just the next level. And it does add kind of a grace to the match where like a guy will just be sliding around out there. And when someone's sliding as they hit a shot, it just looks so smooth.
Yeah, I know. Do people slide on grass? Do you know?
I don't think they do, and I think the reason for it is like you'll see guys slide, like you've seen Djokovic hit the splits on shots and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think generally they don't slide like they do on clay because of that friction aspect. You're able to
Hmm.
slide on clay and then kind of maintain control of it. If you slid on grass, I think it's too slick and you would just fall. And
Yeah.
that's why you see a lot of guys fall when they're playing on grass.
Gotcha, gotcha. I feel like another thing that shouldn't be relevant next year is the line calling. You know how in clay they tend to not use Hawkeye because you can see the ball mark, but that's not always accurate with the referee and the umpire. You could easily pick a wrong mark or it could get kind of scuffed away. It's kind of another component that adds to the clay game.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird today. I was watching the Murray versus Wawrinka match, and they didn't even have like the automated let machine. It was just the umpire going like by his ear or something. And Murray at one point was like, "You just called the let. I didn't hear the noise." And the guy was like, "Yeah, no, I just heard it." And it was just an odd thing to see at this point in the amount of technology we have for them not to be using it at these big tournaments.
I know, especially at Grand Slam too, because I know ATP is going to be implementing it. I'm not sure about the Grand Slams. I could see that just not.
That'd be that'd be tough. I would disagree with that choice, but you can't make them change it if they don't want to. So
Yeah, history, tradition, right?
exactly. But yeah, so now we kind of understand. Thank you for that breakdown of how it plays differently than the other surfaces. But now I kind of want to jump into why it's interesting at the highest level and why, as like the ATP pros play, how it changes the game and sort of the season overall. And so the biggest reason that it has an impact as a surface is because of these clay specialists. I mean, in Andre Agassi's book Open, they actually referred to them as dirt rats, which isn't the nicest name, but I do think to an extent he was just kind of expressing his feeling about them because for an American, it's not always the best surface to go onto clay. But for other players, it's like they're waiting the entire year for that clay stretch from May to June or from April to June. And that's when they really get the majority of their points. A lot of these guys are from Spain or they're from Argentina, South America, where they have a lot of clay courts. And like I said, Americans don't have this because there aren't that many clay courts in America. But the reason this is important is because this can actually lead to a lot more upsets in clay tournaments where a player that might be overall better across all surfaces might not actually be better than a guy that specializes on clay.
Yeah, I feel like you really see that in early Nadal and Federer rivalry. Like later on, Nadal does get the upper hand, beats him in Wimbledon, beats him in Australian Open, but early on it was Federer on grass and hard, but then Nadal on clay. And he was young at the time too, so he wasn't a full, well-rounded player. So he still had that advantage on clay too.
100%, 100%. And I
Yeah.
think one reason for that is because of how people play on clay, which is longer, more tactical points, but also grindier points. And that's
Mm.
kind of what Nadal was able to do to Federer, where even though Federer, great tactician on the court, Nadal could just sit back way behind the baseline, use his athleticism to get to every single ball. And with a slower surface like clay, it's way harder to just blow the ball by your opponent. And it makes it way more preferential kind of for players like Nadal who was able to just sit back there, wait for his chance, and then if maybe Federer came to the net on not the best approach shot, or he just saw a great opportunity from the baseline to step into it, he could kind of counterpunch and then win the point without having necessarily have to set up a excellent tactical point.
So with that being said, do you prefer watching clay matches than any other surface?
I like watching clay matches a lot because I do kind of enjoy that Deminar or Nadal style where you're
Hmm.
seeing a guy kind of scramble around the court and get to a bunch of balls. And it makes it really interesting for me. But that, to an extent, it does take away from some aspects of the game because you can lose a point that it feels like you should have won. And sometimes that feels bad where you're like, that guy really should have won that point, but somehow the other guy pulled a disappearing act out of nowhere and won it. So there's positives and negatives in my book. I don't know if it's my favorite surface, but I do think that it has positives for a viewer.
Yeah, I do like watching clay, but I don't like the variables. Like you said, like what if there's a little divot in the clay and someone's winding up to hit and then, the ball shoots up or it doesn't bounce like a certain height and then they miss hit it. I feel like you get a lot of unforced errors in clay, which can make the game a little sloppier to watch. But all in all, I do like the tactical style that you're saying, where it's longer points. Players are playing more gritty. You're not just relying on pure power. Um, Plus, yeah, like you said, it can be so elegant watching clay.
100%. But also, I've already mentioned this like twice. It definitely hurts the American style of tennis, which is like
Mm,
that big serve, big forehand style, because it can decrease how impactful a powerful serve is. And a lot of Americans, that's their style. Think of Roddick, think of John Isner, just these massive serves and the forehand to follow it up. And on clay, that serve, while it's still obviously helpful to have a massive serve, it's not going to be as impactful as having that other style of game.
Yeah, it's like a neutralizer.
Yeah, exactly. And the lack of experience for Americans on
Hmm.
clay. Like I said, how many matches have you ever played on a clay court? I've played maybe one or two, and it wasn't even the red clay. It was on like true green clay. So it's not the same thing. And there's just a lack of that type of court in America.
Yeah, I know. I know. Look at Darwin Blanche though. He's overseas in Spain. He's training on that red clay. So I could see him, as an American actually do well on clay, which is an exciting thing to see in the future.
100%, 100%. Gotta, yeah, be used to playing at the highest level from a really young age, kind
Yeah.
of.
But hopefully he doesn't become what you said, a dirt rat, just a pure clay specialist.
I mean, it would be interesting to
Because
see
that's a
that though for an
risk.
American.
Yeah.
Wouldn't
I
that
guess.
be
I guess.
kind of unique to see how that sort of style? I think when you can have guys that can break into the top 10 level. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't want to overgeneralize Rude because he's very solid on other surfaces, but I'm going to mention this later. He has 11 of his 12 titles are on clay. So he's
Wow.
kind of like that dirt rat type of player, obviously a little bit more balanced, but he's showing that even just being like exceptional on one surface and very solid on other ones can bring you to like a top 10 level of player. And that big serve, big forehand game on hard court that most of the other Americans have can maybe get you top 20, it looks like, but not necessarily top 10.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of going back to what you're saying about it being unfavorable for Americans, do you think it's also an accessibility point too, where, public tennis courts in the US just aren't going to be clay, right? They cost a lot more money to maintain. You have to pay someone to groom them, line them, water them. Whereas a hard court, you just kind of build it, maybe resurface it every 5 years.
Yeah, I do think though that's kind of a situation where in the US I think there are a lot more public courts in general. Like I don't think
Hmm.
there are as many just random courts that people can go to all the time in European countries. Like I mean,
Yeah.
obviously I don't have that much experience with European countries, but I'm pretty sure in Europe you essentially have to be part of a club to be able to go and play tennis. And I think that's why these players they've played on a bunch on hard court, but they've also played on clay because the clubs that have these courts are really nice,
Hmm.
but there's not as much accessibility for just like the general public to go out and just hit on a regular court.
Yeah. So with these European players, obviously getting more reps on clay, do you think we'll see them do better, at the French Open this year?
I mean, I'd say 100%. I think that I don't see any of the Americans really as top contenders, even though we have guys like Fritz, who's played pretty well on clay outside of like this week in Geneva,
Whaler.
or Tommy Paul made the semifinal in Italy. So
Hmm.
we're seeing a little bit of potential from those guys, and that's definitely a positive, but I don't really see them as major players in this tournament at the French Open. And speaking of the major players, I kind of wanted to break down like this tournament, give a little bit of a preview for it, and talk about the guys that I do think are going to do pretty well here.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So obviously, first up, I gotta mention Djokovic, and I don't think there's really any need to break this one down. He's just so great on all surfaces, and though we seem to kind of see like a little bit of a chink in his armor right now, like he's 14-6 so far this year and doesn't have any titles. Still, he's the number one player in the world. I don't think he's fallen off that far. Maybe he has, but he's still going to obviously be a major threat to winning this major. And then next up, Alcaraz. Alcaraz has 7 clay titles and he's won the Madrid Masters twice. So while he does have some health concerns, based on his match today against JJ Wolf, he seems pretty healthy. He beat Wolf like 6-2, 6-1, 6-2 or something like that. Like completely crushed him. And I mean, JJ Wolf obviously isn't the best clay player and isn't the biggest competition for Alcaraz, given that I think he's somewhere around 100 in the world. But still, he completely clobbered him. And I think that kind of gives a signal about how he's feeling.
I agree. I think that's a good sign just because, especially coming off an injury, you don't want to play, long, grueling tennis, and he just got it done quickly.
Exactly, exactly. You're just giving your body that much more time to rest,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And speaking of guys that need kind of time to rest, Sinner, he has one clay title from 2022, but I don't even think that's important. I think what really matters is that from the second half of 2023 to this year, he's made such a massive step up overall. He's headed toward being the number one player in the world this year. And I don't think we've seen his full potential on clay because really his step up came after the clay season last year. So while he kind of has health concerns, he's been out for a couple of weeks. I still think obviously major contender to win this title.
Yeah, I wonder what the like kind of going back in the tennis process is for him because he hasn't played in a while. He hasn't really gotten those clay reps. If he's like easing into live points right away in practice, or he's just kind of I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see how he'll play because every part of me wants to put Sinner as the favorite, but then you just can't discount that hip injury.
Yeah, you can't discount the hip injury and you can't discount like the kind of lower amount of high level tennis he's played on
Yeah.
clay. Like obviously he played high level tennis in the past on clay,
Hmm.
but like peak level because right now he's at his peak level on hard courts,
Hmm.
but he played what one major hard court tournament this year so far, which was I want to say Monte Carlo.
Oh, yeah, you mean Clay?
Yeah, and after that he's been out pretty much. So while like obviously we saw that he made what the semifinal there, so that's a pretty solid
Hmm.
showing, but I want to see how he brings it in this major here.
Yeah, curious.
Next up is Zverev, who is a very solid player on clay. He has 8 clay titles and 4 Masters, and he also just won the Italian Open. So that kind of shows what level he's at right now. Of 2024, he's actually the number 2 player in the world, right behind Sinner. My only concern with him in terms of winning this slam are one, is he focused on this, given the fact that he has this court case going on simultaneously? And two, he's never won a slam before. So just the fact that he's never done it means that even if he made the final, he's going to feel way more nerves than someone that's already won a slam.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see Zverev. Like, I don't think he's a five set player. He's just not mentally able to sustain that long. Like, I think you can be a great Masters player, but then that doesn't always translate to Grand Slams. And I think he's one of those guys.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
I could see him just being pretty volatile and fall apart in the fourth set if he
yeah,
doesn't close out in three.
especially if he can't keep his serve under control, because obviously we
Mm,
saw how much of a weapon that can be.
hmm.
But we've also seen in the past him kind of mentally lose it on his serve and it becomes a major liability.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, in an ATP Masters, you only need to win two sets. And can he sustain that serve for three? Maybe, maybe
Yeah.
not. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and really, like, can he sustain it for 5? Like,
Hmm. If he
sometimes,
needs to, yeah.
sometimes, yeah, you can serve well for 4 sets and lose 2 of them,
Hmm.
and then you get to that 5th set. If your serve falls apart, then all of a sudden your game is falling apart with it.
Yeah, I'd like to see him do well, though. I want to see him get a slam.
100. I mean, I think that it would be definitely. He kind of deserves it based on the amount of time he's put into the game at the highest level.
I love how you said deserves. You know, doesn't Andy Murray deserve, what was it, 4 or 5 Australian Open titles? Because he's been
Yeah,
in the final 4 or 5 times.
yeah. I mean, you
Doesn't
look
know,
at
you don't always get what you deserve, huh?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you know who really got what he deserved more than he deserved probably was Vavrinka. I mean, speaking on it
Yeah.
today, that dude won 3 out of the 4 Grand Slams, but I guess he's just or Grand Slam finals that he played in, but I guess he's just that game time player.
Danny Slass.
Yeah, Stan the man.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But speaking on guys that haven't necessarily gotten what they deserve, Medvedev and Rublev. I was speaking of Medvedev there because obviously he's played in 6 Grand Slam finals and he's won 1. But both these guys have won titles on clay, so they can play at a peak level that is very high on clay. And overall, very solid players across all surfaces. But I think to an extent, they're kind of hit or miss, especially on clay. Like Medvedev lost in round one last year on clay. He's lost in the first round at the French Open, I mean, and he lost in the first round a few times at the French Open. And I think he's only made a couple runs that were decent, nothing crazy. I think his best is the quarterfinal. So obviously, he's also very vocal about how much he hates playing on clay. So I think while he could do well, you got to kind of be like, okay, if he loses early, I'm not going to be that shocked. And kind of same thing with Rublev. Like you could see Rublev make a deep run and you'd be like, oh, I mean, I'm not that shocked by it. But then you could also see him lose in the second or third round and be like, okay, understandable.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna roll these guys out.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope I eat my words, but I'm just not expecting a whole lot from them. At
Yeah.
least this one
I mean,
go.
if I saw Medvedev win this title, it would probably be the most shocking of these guys that I mentioned so far.
Yeah, I think if they can hold it together, because they tend to flare up a lot, and I think, if someone gets under their skin, they're done. Like I think it's a lot different from a hardcore where they feel more comfortable because they already don't like the clay, so when things aren't going their way, it's just all downhill from there.
Yeah, 100%.
Hmm.
But moving on to a guy that is a clay specialist and, like I said, has won 11 of his 12 titles on clay. That's last year's finalist, Casper Ruud, also the finalist from 2022. He just won Geneva. He won in Barcelona earlier this clay season. He's a guy where you're like, dude, he does, like I said, with deserving a title, he deserves to win the French Open at some point. I don't know whether he gets it done this year, but he's got to be considered a contender based on how he's done the past 2 years. He's clearly comfortable at Roland Garros, and I think he's coming in with confidence after just taking that title. So we'll see how he does. I'm expecting a lot from him.
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching him in Geneva, and the court's a lot smaller, so you don't get as much room. And he was like almost hitting the back, hitting the sides of the like where the stands are. So I think at Roland Garros, where he's gonna have a lot more room to work with, he's just gonna be even more comfortable back
Yeah,
there.
he's used to Philippe Chatrier.
Yeah,
And then another
same,
guy that's
same.
been a finalist at the French Open is Tsitsipas from 2021. He was one set away actually from winning the whole thing before Djokovic made that spectacular comeback. But I mean, Tsitsipas, I also think is a clay specialist. He's won 5 of his 11 titles on clay. Obviously, not the same rate as Rude, but still around half being on clay, I think kind of signals that you're a clay specialist, given the fact that clay is kind of a small portion of the season generally. And he won Monte Carlo this year, so he's shown that that top level isn't, oh, it's just from the past. He still has it this year. I mean, we'll see how he can bring it in to obviously a Grand Slam, but obviously he has that level. It's interesting though because we have Tsitsipas winning one of the Masters 1000. We have Rublev winning one of the Masters 1000 and Zverev winning one of the Masters 1000. So all of these guys have to be coming in with some level of confidence to this major. Makes it a very different look than when you saw Nadal win 2 or 3 of those coming into the French Open and you're like, okay, this guy's like almost guaranteed it.
Yeah, total toss up. And I think it depends on Tsitsipas's draw too, because he could get challenged early on, and I would say he's kind of a matchup guy. Like it's hard to say because in the in the Masters he won against Ruud, you saw him dominate him, and then the week later he got dominated by Ruud. So I can't really tell what his matchup is, but he's very. I just think he's a variable player, and
Yeah.
I
I
don't.
mean, I don't know if this is a true statement. Maybe I'm completely off, but I think sometimes you almost see Tsitsipas overlook opponents
Mhm.
because he does get upset like a decent amount. And so he'll lose to someone where you're like, how the hell did he lose to that person? But I think sometimes he's too focused on later on in his run that he'll lose in the second round because he was thinking about his fourth round opponent.
Yeah, and he's always attributing his losses to himself, like beating himself. Like, oh, I didn't play my best tennis. It's not like he ever gets outplayed by an opponent, at least in his head.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's also just like kind of a mindset thing. As a player, you kind of have to believe that you can beat everyone you came up against.
Yeah, yeah, good point.
But
Well,
going back to Nadal, I also think he's a contender for the title. Obviously, he's the
oh
undisputed
yeah.
GOAT of clay. And while have been questions about his level overall, I mean, I don't think you can count him out. He's only lost 3 times in his career at the French Open. And he does have Zverev in the first round, so doesn't have an easy matchup. But I think to an extent, you have to kind of be like, hey, if you were going to try to win the whole thing, you have to be willing to beat the best guys in the draw. And while it's tough to face him in the first round, it's like Nadal isn't worried, I think, about going out in the first round. He's worried about whether or not he wins the whole thing.
hmm Yeah, I'll actually be at this match today, so I am so excited to see this. I'm kind of in the camp where it's potentially going to be his last ever French Open match,
Yeah.
and I've just kind of accepted it.
Yeah, I mean, it did sound like, based on the stuff I'm seeing on social media, that Nadal's still up in the air on whether it's going to be his last French Open match, because they wanted to do this whole sort of ceremony for him in this tournament, and he was kind of like, "No, I'm not sure if this is going to be the end of my career, so I don't want to do it too early." And so hopefully that's a sign that he may be still around next year.
Yeah, yeah. I also think that's a sign where he just like himself mentally, he's like, I'm not losing today. Why are we doing the ceremony? So good to
Yeah.
see that confidence.
Yeah. And then there's a couple more guys that I kind of want to just mention that like kind of could make a run. And that's just this small group of the Argentinian players. You got guys like Baez, Cerundolo, and Echeverry who are very solid clay players. And I think they could make it through 3 or 4 rounds and be kind of surprises in those later rounds. Don't really see them as contenders for the title, but I think they're guys to watch in the tournament.
Yeah, I would put Navoni in there too. Sneaky Argentinian.
Yeah, he's a guy that kind of even's under my radar. Honestly, kind of funny one. Speaking of guys that fly under the radar, Umber lost today in the first round, and I don't think anybody made a comment about it really.
I saw that. I was
We always
bummed.
talk about it. Flies completely under the radar.
Yeah.
No one ever notices when he wins or when he loses.
Yeah, because he was seated 14th, right? I want
Something
to
like
say.
that. Something like
I
that.
know.
Somewhere in the
Top
teens.
French player too.
Exactly. But there's
Crazy.
positives and negatives to being under the radar. I think
Crazy.
today
What do you
is
think about
kind of a positive.
oh, sorry.
No worries.
Um, no, I was just gonna say, what do you think about picking a Grand Slam draw? Do you think it's pretty much like a March Madness bracket where like it's impossible to get it right? Like so much shit just happens.
Well, I mean, it's the same likelihood, isn't it? I think March Madness is
Is it
actually less.
64?
March
No,
Madness is
128,
64.
128, yeah.
Well, March Madness is 4 times 16, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
64, and this
Right.
is
So Roland
128. So this
Garros
is even
128.
more unlikely to be able to pick every
Jeez.
single match.
Jeez.
Yeah. And
Uh,
honestly, I would have said the Chileans too as sleepers that can make a run, but Jari and Tavilo both lost on day one of the tournament. Not even just round one, literally day one. So I'm like, okay, not gonna bring those guys up as people that I think can make a run because they definitely didn't.
yeah, not gonna lie, totally gave into the recency bias here. I was like, oh, those two making a run this year, like Jari potentially quarters. Yeah, okay.
Exactly, exactly. But alrighty, you ready to hop into segments?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with news of the week. So I know you care about this, Aiden, so much. This is like your favorite thing to talk about.
Okay,
But
sounds good. So we're talking about some really hard, detailed statistics. Sounds like.
yes, we are talking about Tsitsipas and Paula Badoza getting back together. Can you believe that they broke up less than a month ago and they're already back together?
I feel like that's like not breaking up, right? Like it's like
Oh,
they were on a break, like Ross and Rachel from Friends.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we have to remember they're still young, early 20s. So, there's going to be that little immaturity in a relationship. But
Yeah,
I think
volatility, as they say.
especially with Steph.
Yeah.
Steph's dad's probably pissed, but I thought it was funny because this time around, like, yeah, we're gonna live more of a private life. We're way too much in the public. They had a joint Instagram that was posting daily, like all these couple pics. So I don't think we'll see that anymore. But
They
um,
broke up just to delete the Instagram. That was the whole thing. They were
yeah.
like, hey, this is too much pressure, daily posts. We got to cut it out. We're going to pretend to break up just so we can delete the Instagram.
I know. Well, I found out that it was actually Steph who, broke it off the first time because he had said that. He's like, "Oh, I made a mistake. I was trying to balance my job, just playing tennis professionally, and a girlfriend or a romantic relationship. But I realized without her, she was the one I loved." He got a little sappy, but
Mm. So his dad
that,
told him to break up with her.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then he won Monte Carlo. So
I
I
don't
gotta
know.
say, I'm betting the house now on City Boss going out first round.
I know.
He's
I
losing
don't. I
that
don't.
quality he had in Monte Carlo now that I know this.
I
But
know.
no, I'm just kidding. But
Yeah, I don't think my futures bet is looking too good right now. But
exactly.
all right, interesting stuff. What do you have this week?
Yeah, so my what's new is like I mentioned kind of earlier in the episode is Zverev. He's having his court case actually right now. The ATP is letting him play while the court case is going on because well, it's kind of a weird situation because he technically hasn't been found guilty yet because he's in this sort of appeal court. And I'm just wondering about what the consequences will be if he is found guilty of it, because obviously there's going to be a harsh reaction. I'm really just confused about whether or not he's going to be like kicked from the tour completely or if he's just going to be kept on and banned from certain tournaments. It's a tough situation overall for everyone involved, I think. But I don't really want to take a stance on this because obviously we don't know what the court has said yet.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, hopefully it doesn't impact his Roland Garros performance, but weird situation. I know there's a player cohort, like a players association that does make the rules. So ultimately it'll be up to them to decide if he's going to be kicked from the tour if found guilty. And he's actually on that association too. So I'm sure he won't be able to make a decision in his own case,
Yeah.
but I
See,
guess
I don't
only
think I was
time will,
guilty,
yeah,
so I can decide that for sure.
yeah, only time will tell.
Yeah, but also,
Yeah,
I know you've said that like he's had a accusation about this in the past, right?
yeah, this is his second one.
Yeah, so that's the weird thing about that. I think is that like he was found not guilty of that. So how
Hmm.
much does that play into this one? Like, if he was found not guilty of that one, but the accusation is still there. That's the weird thing about cases like this is because the accusation was there, it comes into play, even though he was in the end not found guilty in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to get real legal, the judge needs to do a good job of making the ruling based on the information that is presented in the current case and not, using anything from before.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's just a tough situation. I wanted to bring it up because it's
Hmm.
relevant to now, but I don't want to take a stance on it because I don't really know all the facts. I don't know the truth, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it'll be relevant for the rest of the summer. I think I want to say an 8-week trial almost.
Yeah, ongoing.
All right. Well, let's talk betting now.
Sounds good. Sounds good. A little bit lighter, but a little bit more
Yeah.
degenerate.
Yeah. Let's go.
So what'd you go for this week?
All right. So you're the pronunciation guy. Is it Mahach?
I
Mahach?
think yeah, Mahach is pretty.
Mahach?
They might have a little bit of a Balkan sound in there, Mahach,
Mahach.
but I'm not sure to be honest.
All right, Mahach over Borges. I'm just gonna go with Borges. No, no, no. Sorry, I'm not gonna go with Borges on the bet. I'm just gonna go with the pronunciation Borges. But Mahach is gonna be my take on this. He's minus 155, and I'm kind of doing an Aidan bet right here, not because I'm taking favorite, but because I'm taking a momentum play right here.
Momentum
Yeah,
always a good
momentum,
move.
momentum. So an object that stays in motion. What is it?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Newton's
Some
first law or
inertia,
whatever.
Yeah.
No,
So
Newton's third law, I want to say.
yeah, an object in motion stays in motion, and Mahatch is rolling. But no,
Exactly.
he had a great run in Geneva, and this is the first time these guys are playing against each other. So yeah, like I said, I'm just going with the better player here. I think he's been playing great tennis recently, and he's got a good confidence boost. Had a big win against Djokovic last week, so I think this will carry him in through a dub.
Yeah. I mean, the only positive I think for Borges is that he did pretty well, I think, at the last Grand Slam. Like I think he beat Dimitrov at the Australian Open. So that's a positive for him, but I don't know what he's necessarily been doing as much recently.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Who are you taking this week?
I'm taking the biggest match of the day for sure. Nadal plus 270 over Zverev. And
Wow.
hey, I get it. Zverev is the favorite for good reason. He's been playing great so far this year. Like I said, he's the number 2 player in 2024. But even if Nadal is weakened, he's still the go to Clay. I got to take these odds. I got to take the positive odds for Nadal, especially because it's like when we go with the American, I want Nadal to win, to be honest. So that's why I'm going with Nadal here.
That is juicy. How do you not take Nadal plus 270 in a Roland Garros match? That's insane. But I'm pretty sure he was like what, the fifth or sixth favorite to win
Yeah,
Roland Garros in futures. So I don't know how
I
it
think
doesn't
that
really
what
add
happened
up.
is that when they were making those odds, they were like, okay, to win the whole thing, and then they saw this match and they were like, oh, this was a match that could have been the final, and it's
Mhm.
happening in the first round. So
Yeah.
that kind of makes this a pretty important match because if Nadal wins this match, he obviously gets to essentially take the 4 seeds run, which is going
Mhm.
to be against sort of lighter opponents for the later rounds.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna join you on this actually. But so like I said before, I'm in France for the French Open, and I didn't place my bets before leaving. So now I gotta text some people to place the bets for me. Can't
Exactly.
can't bet here. Can't bet
Yeah.
here.
It's like California.
I know. All right, match of the week here.
Sounds good. What'd you go for this week?
Dude, I went with Rude barely squeaking by Kaboli in the semifinal in Geneva. So it wasn't really a great match to begin with. The first two sets, it was 1-6, then 6-1. But then it ended off with a third set decider, not only a decider, but a tiebreaker. And it was in a semifinal of the tournament. So I kind of I kind of love watching or having the tension build up that whole last set where all right, what's it gonna be? What's it gonna be? Tiebreaker. And I'm obviously a Rude fan, so I had to put this as my match of the week because of the fact that this put him through to the title. And I feel like Kaboli, it would just not be good for Rude to lose to Kaboli. So it was kind of like a weight off my shoulder here too.
Yeah. The interesting thing about this match is he actually ended up playing the title match like 2 hours after this match because there was like delays in Geneva. And so he played this match, got a 2 hour break, then went out and played the final and won it. So pretty impressive that he was able to do that on that quick of a turnaround.
Yeah, what a beast.
Yeah. And
Norwegian
speaking of him
beast.
being a beast, I also went for a Rude match this week. And honestly, a kind of similar Rude match. Rude played Baez, I think the round before he played Kaboli, and
Mhm.
he beat him 6-3, 3-6, 6-4. Really, it was just a classic kind of grindy clay tennis match. Baez was sitting way behind the baseline, kind of forcing Rude to be the aggressor, which isn't necessarily how Rude likes to play. Pretty fast through the first 2 sets. I think they were both done in about an hour 10 total. But like in that match you had, that third set kind of just became this back and forth. You didn't know what was going to happen sort of set because it started normal, had maybe one break early, but then ended with 4 breaks in a row, which just made it crazy exciting. And Rude ended up getting it done, breaking in the last game. Actually, Rude or Baez double faulted to lose the match, which is always a bummer. But it was just a crazy last set, especially, and you just didn't know how it was going to end up.
Yeah, the double fall to lose the match. I feel like it happens more than we think, and it's just such a bummer. Like if you're obviously the person, but
Yeah, I mean, I think I would
it's the
say that
pressure getting to you, right?
exactly. I think there, if you looked at like the points that in a match that people double fault the most, you're gonna see like it happens way more on critical points than it does on like just average middle of the game points.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.